The sound of the slap didn't just echo through the courtroom. It detonated a war that would expose the most dangerous police conspiracy in state history. One moment, Officer Jose was the smirking face of untouchable authority, standing over MP Rebecca Wood with the kind of arrogance that comes from decades of badge-protected impunity. He thought his connection to Commissioner Gary Santiago's Iron Circle gave him the right to silence a woman powerful enough to burn his entire network to the ground. He made a fatal mistake. He raised his hand, but he forgot that before Rebecca Wood was a politician, she was a fighter who had sworn never again to intimidation. Watch closely, because what happens in the next 3 seconds is the most satisfying instance of instant karma you will ever see, and the moment that would force a judge, a city, and an entire corrupt system to choose sides. The air inside Courtroom 7A was suffocating, thick with floor wax, stale, recirculated oxygen, and the metallic taste of fear. It was the kind of room where reputations came to die, where the powerful crushed the powerless under the weight of procedure and precedent. But on this sweltering Thursday morning, the script was about to be rewritten in blood and broken teeth. Sitting at the prosecutor's table, spine straight as a blade, was Member of Parliament Rebecca Wood. She didn't need to be there. Most politicians would have sent an assistant to observe a police brutality case this radioactive. 3 officers accused of planting evidence, systematic racial profiling, and connections to Commissioner Gary Santiago's shadow network. But Rebecca wasn't most politicians. She had grown up in the districts these officers had terrorized, and she had built her career on a simple promise: equal justice or no peace. She adjusted the collar of her emerald green suit, her eyes locked on the witness stand, where a trembling victim named Marcus Chen was testifying. He was sweating through his shirt, his voice barely audible, as he described the night officers broke into his home without a warrant. But Rebecca's attention wasn't on Marcus, it was on the man standing near the jury box. Officer Jose.
Jose wasn't on trial, not officially, but he stood there like a monument to everything wrong with the system. Arms crossed, jaw clenched, his 6'3" frame radiating barely controlled violence. He was supposed to be providing courtroom security. Instead, he was a walking threat, a message from the Iron Circle delivered in flesh and a badge. Rebecca had filed 4 motions to remove him from the courtroom. Judge Arthur Brennan, a man known for his fraternal relationship with the police union, had denied every single one, calling her concerns unfounded speculation. Mr. Chen, the defense attorney, a silver-haired snake named Richard Voss, drawled from behind his notes. "You claim the officers planted narcotics in your vehicle, but isn't it true you have 2 prior arrests for—" "Objection, Your Honor." Rebecca's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "Counsel is attempting to smear the witness with irrelevant history to distract from photographic evidence of police misconduct." She walked toward the bench, her heels clicking against the tile with military precision. From her briefcase, she withdrew an 8x10 photograph and held it up for the court to see. It showed Officer Jose. In the photo, he was standing outside a warehouse owned by one of Santiago's shell corporations, shaking hands with a known drug trafficker. The courtroom went silent. Judge Brennan leaned forward, his face reddening. "Counselor Wood, what is the relevance?" But before he could finish, Officer Jose moved. He didn't think, he didn't calculate, he just snapped. In 3 strides, he crossed the courtroom floor. His hand came up fast, a blur of rage and wounded pride, aimed directly at Rebecca's face. The slap was meant to humiliate, to remind her of her place, to send a message that some people were still untouchable. Crack! The sound reverberated off the mahogany walls. Gasps erupted from the gallery. The judge's gavel froze mid-air. But Rebecca's eyes didn't flicker with fear. They didn't well with tears. They narrowed with cold, calculated fury. Because before the shock could even register on José's face, before his hand could return to his side, before he could even think about what he'd just done, Rebecca's weight shifted, her hips rotated, her fist came up in a perfect cross counter, her knuckles connecting with José's jaw with the precision of a surgical strike. Thud! Officer José's body went limp before he hit the floor. He crashed backward into the jury box, scattering papers and knocking over a water pitcher. The bailiff rushed forward, but it was too late. José was out cold.
The judge's gavel finally fell, but Justice Brennan just sat there, his mouth open, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. Rebecca straightened her suit jacket, her breathing steady, her expression unreadable. She looked down at the unconscious officer, then up at the judge, and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the stunned courtroom. "Self-defense, Your Honor. I'm sure the court's cameras captured everything." Educational insight. In most jurisdictions, self-defense law requires 3 elements. The judge's gavel finally fell, but Justice Brennan just sat there, his mouth open, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. Rebecca straightened her suit jacket, her breathing steady, her expression unreadable. She looked down at the unconscious officer, then up at the judge, and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the stunned courtroom. "Self-defense, Your Honor. I'm sure the court's cameras captured everything." Educational insight. In most jurisdictions, self-defense law requires 3 elements: an imminent threat, a reasonable belief of danger, and a proportionate response. Was Rebecca's knockout punch a legal act of self-defense, or did she cross the line into retaliation? The answer could determine whether she faces assault charges or becomes a national hero. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for their phones. The defense attorney was on his feet, shouting objections that no one could hear over the chaos. But in the eye of the storm, Rebecca Wood stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, her eyes locked on the judge. She had just done something no politician had ever dared to do. She had hit back, and now Commissioner Gary Santiago's Iron Circle would have to decide. Would they let this insult stand, or would they destroy her? The war for the soul of the city had just begun. What will Commissioner Santiago do now that his officer has been humiliated in open court? Will Rebecca face charges? And what secrets are on those photographs that made José snap? The judge is still frozen, the cameras are rolling, and the entire city is about to pick sides in a battle that will expose corruption at the highest levels.
The video went viral in 11 minutes. Someone in the gallery, probably a law student with fast thumbs and faster instincts, had captured the entire confrontation on their phone. The shaky footage showed everything. Officer José crossing the courtroom floor like a man possessed, the slap that cracked through the air, and then Rebecca Wood's devastating counterpunch that sent him crashing into the jury box like a sack of dirty laundry. By the time Rebecca's lawyer had gotten her out of the courthouse through a side entrance, the clip had been shared 47,000 times. By the time she reached her apartment in the city's historic district, it had crossed 2 million. And by the time she poured herself a glass of scotch with trembling hands and sat down on her couch, the entire country had picked a side. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text messages from colleagues, emails from strangers, notifications from every social media platform she'd ever joined and several she hadn't.
She muted it all and turned on the television, flipping to the 24-hour news cycle that had become the nation's pulse. The split screen said everything. On the left, a panel of pundits with furrowed brows and expensive suits debated whether Rebecca Wood was a vigilante in a blazer or a victim defending herself. On the right, the video played on loop, frozen at the exact moment her fist connected with Jose's jaw. "This is absolutely unacceptable," a former police chief sputtered, his face red with indignation. "You cannot assault a law enforcement officer and expect to walk away. I don't care what provoked it. She's a member of parliament. She should know better." A civil rights attorney sitting across from him leaned forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "He struck her first, on camera, in a courtroom. That's not just assault, that's an officer of the law committing violence against an elected official while she was presenting evidence of his corruption. If anything, she showed restraint." Rebecca took a long sip of scotch and changed the channel. Same debate, different faces. She changed it again and again. Every network, every pundit, every talking head was dissecting the 3 seconds that would define the rest of her life. Social media was even worse. Twitter had exploded into tribal warfare. #StandWithRebecca was trending at #1, filled with videos of people recreating the punch, memes comparing her to action heroes, and think pieces about the necessity of self-defense. But #ArrestRebeccaWood wasn't far behind, flooded with calls for her resignation, criminal charges, and claims that she was above the law. Her phone lit up again, despite being on silent. This time, it was a call she couldn't ignore. The name on the screen made her stomach tighten. Marcus Chen, the witness from the trial, the man she'd been trying to protect when everything went sideways. "Are you safe?" she answered, skipping pleasantries. "They're saying you might be charged. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. If I just..." "Don't," she cut him off. "You did nothing wrong. Neither did I." She wasn't sure she believed that yet, but she needed him to. There was a pause on the other end, heavy with unspoken fear. "The Iron Circle doesn't forget, Rebecca. You embarrassed one of their own in front of the whole world. They're going to come for you." She knew he was right. Commissioner Gary Santiago's network had been operating in the shadows for years, crushing anyone who dared to challenge their authority. But they'd never gone after a sitting member of parliament before. Not publicly, not like this. Rebecca hung up and stared at her television screen. The news had shifted to a press conference. Commissioner Santiago stood behind a podium, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression a masterclass in controlled fury. Behind him, a wall of police officers stood at attention, their faces grim. "Today," Santiago began, his voice measured and cold, "one of our finest was assaulted while performing his duty to maintain order in a court of law. This attack on Officer Jose is an attack on every man and woman who wears the badge, and make no mistake, there will be consequences." The camera flashes exploded like gunfire. Rebecca watched as Santiago's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We are calling on the Attorney General to file charges immediately. No one, regardless of their position or political influence, is above the law." Rebecca set down her glass. Her hands had stopped shaking. The fear that had coiled in her chest since she'd left the courtroom began to transform into something sharper, hotter. Santiago wanted a war? Fine, but he'd forgotten something crucial about Rebecca Wood. She hadn't learned to fight just to defend herself. She'd learned to fight so she could stand up when everyone else sat down. Her phone buzzed one more time, a text from an unknown number. "They're coming for you. Run." Rebecca deleted the message and turned off the TV. She wasn't running. Not now. Not ever. The country had picked sides. Now it was time to see whose side justice was really on. The knock came at 2:47 a.m. Rebecca was still awake, sitting at her kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and 3 legal pads covered in notes. She'd been mapping Santiago's network for hours: names, dates, shell companies, offshore accounts. The photograph she'd shown in court was just the tip of the iceberg. She had more, much more. The knock came again, firm, deliberate, the kind of knock that said whoever was on the other side wasn't going away. Rebecca moved to the door and checked the peephole. 2 men in dark suits stood in the hallway, their faces expressionless. Not police uniforms, private security, Santiago's people. She opened the door but left the chain on. It's the middle of the night. The taller one handed a card through the gap, embossed gold lettering, Commissioner Gary Santiago. Below it, an address she recognized, the Pinnacle Club, a private establishment where the city's elite brokered deals over 30-year scotch. The commissioner requests a conversation, the man said. Now. Rebecca almost laughed. Santiago wanted to meet on his turf at an hour designed to intimidate, classic power play. But she was curious, and if she was honest with herself, she wanted to look the man in the eye. 20 minutes later, she walked into the Pinnacle Club's private lounge. The room smelled of leather and old money. Santiago sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, his silver hair perfectly combed, despite the ungodly hour. He didn't stand when she entered. "Rebecca Wood," he said, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. "The woman who punched her way into the headlines." She remained standing. "Commissioner, to what do I owe the pleasure of being summoned like a subordinate?" Santiago's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I admire directness, so let me be direct. What happened in that courtroom was unfortunate. Officer Jose allowed his emotions to cloud his judgment. But your response," he paused, setting down his glass, "your response has created a problem for both of us." I defended myself. "You assaulted a police officer." His voice hardened. "The Attorney General is preparing charges as we speak. Assault, battery, potentially obstruction of justice. Your career in Parliament is over, Rebecca, unless—" There it was, the deal. She'd been expecting it. Santiago leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "You resign, quietly. Issue a statement apologizing for your momentary lapse in judgment. The assault charges disappear. You keep your pension, your dignity, and you walk away to live whatever life you choose. Perhaps academia. You'd make an excellent professor."
Rebecca felt her jaw tighten. "And the corruption case? The evidence of your officers planting drugs, falsifying reports, terrorizing neighborhoods?" "Circumstantial, inadmissible, irrelevant." He waved a hand dismissively. "The system has mechanisms, Rebecca, checks and balances. If there were truly systemic problems, they would have been addressed through proper channels." "Proper channels you control." Santiago's mask slipped for just a moment. His eyes went cold, reptilian. "I've built relationships over 30 years. Judges, prosecutors, city council members, union leaders. The Iron Circle isn't a conspiracy, Rebecca. It's a network of professionals who understand that order requires strength. You're trying to tear down something you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You've corrupted the system to serve yourself." Santiago stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. "You have 24 hours. After that, the Attorney General files charges, and I cannot protect you from what comes next. The media will crucify you. Your allies will abandon you. And when you're convicted, and you will be convicted, you'll serve time in a facility where many of the inmates remember the cases you prosecuted." He walked toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. The photograph you presented in court, the one showing Officer Jose with Alberto Ruiz, unfortunate timing, but explainable. Jose was conducting an undercover investigation. His commanding officer will testify to that effect." Rebecca's blood went cold. Santiago had already prepared his counter-narrative. 24 hours, Rebecca. Choose wisely." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Rebecca stood alone in the empty lounge, her reflection staring back at her from the dark windows. Santiago had shown his hand. He thought she could be bought off, scared off, or crushed. He thought she was just another obstacle to be managed. He was wrong. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Detective Marcus," she said quietly, "this is Rebecca Wood. You told me to call if I ever needed someone who knew how deep the rot went. I'm ready to talk." On the other end of the line, retired Detective Thomas Marcus, the man Santiago had forced into early retirement 5 years ago, let out a long breath. "I've been waiting for this call for a long time, Miss Wood. Meet me tomorrow and bring everything you have. If we're going to war with the Iron Circle, we'd better make damn sure we win."
7 years earlier. Rebecca Wood was 26 years old, fresh out of law school, and terrified. She stood in the parking garage beneath the district courthouse, her hands shaking as she tried to unlock her car. The case file was still clutched against her chest, her first major trial, a civil rights lawsuit against 3 officers accused of brutality. She'd won. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. That's when she heard the footsteps. "Counselor Wood." The voice came from behind her, low and dangerous. She turned to find Officer Dale Brennan, one of the men she'd just helped convict, standing 10 feet away. His badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. His partner, Officer Harris, emerged from behind a concrete pillar. "That was quite a performance in there," Brennan said, moving closer. "Got the jury all teary-eyed with your little speech about justice and accountability." Rebecca's back pressed against her car. "You shouldn't be here. The judge issued—" "A restraining order?" Harris laughed. "Who's going to enforce it? Us?" Brennan stepped into her space, close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Fighting for the little people? Let me tell you something, little girl. This city eats heroes for breakfast, and lawyers who don't know their place—" He reached out and flicked the case file from her hands, papers scattered across the oil-stained concrete. "They learn." Rebecca's voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Please, just leave me alone." Brennan's hand shot out, grabbing her shoulder and shoving her hard against the car. Not enough to leave a visible bruise, but enough to send a message. "That's better. Please. Maybe you're learning already." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Drop the appeal. Convince your client to settle. Or next time, there won't be cameras, there won't be witnesses, just you and the understanding that some people are untouchable." They left her there, trembling in the dim garage, surrounded by scattered legal documents. She gathered the papers with shaking hands, climbed into her car, and sat in the darkness for 20 minutes before she could stop crying. That night, Rebecca stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her eyes were red, her professional blazer wrinkled from where Brennan had grabbed her. She looked weak, powerless, exactly how they wanted her to feel. She made a decision. The next morning, she walked into Martinez Combat Academy, a boxing gym in the industrial district that smelled of sweat and leather and determination. The owner, Elena Martinez, was a former MMA fighter with scarred knuckles and eyes that had seen everything. "I need to learn to fight,"
Rebecca said. Elena looked her up and down, the designer handbag, the expensive shoes, the hands that had never thrown a punch. Why? Rebecca's voice was steady this time. Because I refuse to be afraid anymore. Elena smiled. Good answer. We start tomorrow at 5 a.m. Don't be late. For 3 years, Rebecca trained, 6 days a week. Boxing, kickboxing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Krav Maga. Her knuckles split and healed. Her body learned to move with precision and power. But more importantly, her mind learned something Brennan and Harris had tried to take from her. She had the right to take up space, to stand her ground, to hit back. Elena became more than a trainer. She became the older sister Rebecca never had, teaching her that strength wasn't about aggression, it was about refusing to be diminished. Fighting isn't about anger, Elena told her during a late-night sparring session. It's about clarity. When someone tries to make you small, you remind them and yourself that you're not. Rebecca never saw Brennan again after that night in the parking garage. His appeal failed. He served his time. But she never forgot the feeling of being cornered, powerless, afraid. And when Officer Josea's hand came whistling toward her face in that courtroom, 7 years of training and 7 years of swearing never again, crystallized into a single, perfect counterpunch. She hadn't hit Jose because she was angry. She'd hit him because she'd learned in the hardest way possible that the only person who could truly protect Rebecca Wood was Rebecca Wood herself. And she'd be damned if she ever let anyone make her feel small again.
The emergency hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Judge Arthur Brennan, no relation to the officer from Rebecca's past, though the coincidence wasn't lost on her, sat behind the bench with the weight of the entire legal system resting on his shoulders. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. News cameras lined the back wall. Every major network had sent their legal correspondents. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a referendum on power, privilege, and the limits of self-defense. Rebecca sat at the defense table, her emerald suit replaced with a more subdued navy. Her lawyer, Marcus Chen's recommendation, a silver-haired civil rights veteran named Patricia Okonkwo, shuffled through notes with practiced calm. On the prosecution side sat Assistant District Attorney Vincent Reyes, a man who'd built his career on police union endorsements and never met a badge he wouldn't defend. Judge Brennan cleared his throat. We're here to determine whether Member of Parliament Rebecca Wood should be held in contempt of court for striking Officer Jose during official proceedings, and whether assault charges should move forward. Mr. Reyes, your position. Reyes stood, his voice carrying the righteous indignation of a man who believed every word he said. Your Honor, the facts are simple. Miss Wood struck a law enforcement officer in a court of law. Regardless of provocation, and we dispute that any legitimate provocation occurred, her response was disproportionate, violent, and represents a fundamental contempt for the judicial process. Officer Jose required medical attention. He suffered a concussion and facial fractures. This wasn't self-defense, it was assault. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Rebecca kept her face neutral, but her hands were clenched beneath the table. Patricia Okonkwo rose slowly, her presence commanding the room. Your Honor, the prosecution would have this court ignore the most critical fact. Officer Jose struck Miss Wood first, without warning, without justification, while she was acting in her official capacity as a member of Parliament, presenting evidence in a corruption case. The courtroom video shows clearly, and I quote from the transcript, Officer Jose crossed the courtroom floor, raised his hand, and delivered a forceful, open-handed strike to Miss Wood's face. That, Your Honor, is assault. My client's response was immediate, instinctive, and entirely proportionate to the threat she faced. Judge Brennan leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Counselor, proportionate. Your client rendered an officer unconscious with a single blow."
Because she's trained, Your Honor. Should a woman be punished for being competent in self-defense? The law doesn't require a victim to absorb multiple blows before responding. It requires a reasonable belief of immediate danger. Officer Jose, a man significantly larger and stronger than my client, with a history of violence that she was literally presenting evidence of, struck her in a courtroom. Any reasonable person would believe they were in danger. Reyes shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She's a politician, not a victim. She provoked Jose with inflammatory accusations." "She presented evidence," Okonkwo cut in, her voice sharp. "Evidence that Officer Jose found so threatening that he resorted to violence. If anything, his attack validates the very corruption she was exposing." Judge Brennan raised his hand. "Enough. I've reviewed the video 17 times. I've consulted precedent. I've barely slept." He paused, looking directly at Rebecca. "Ms. Wood, do you have anything to say before I rule?" Rebecca stood. Her voice was steady, clear. "Your Honor, 7 years ago, I was intimidated by officers who thought their badges made them untouchable. I swore I would never be that powerless again. When Officer Jose struck me, I had a choice: let him silence me through violence or stand my ground. I chose to stand. If that makes me guilty, then I'm guilty of refusing to be afraid." The courtroom was silent. Judge Brennan's gavel hung in the air, poised between justice and precedent, between the letter of the law and the spirit of it. Outside, thousands watched on their screens, waiting for an answer to the question that had divided the nation. Now we ask you, if you were Judge Brennan, what would you decide? Would you hold Rebecca Wood in contempt and allow the assault charges to proceed, upholding the principle that no one, regardless of provocation, should strike an officer of the law in a courtroom? Or would you dismiss all charges, recognizing that she acted in legitimate self-defense against an officer who abused his authority and struck first? The answer would determine not just Rebecca's fate, but the message sent to every person who had ever stood up to power and been struck down for it. The gavel waited, the nation waited, and in that moment of suspended judgment, the true weight of justice hung in the balance. Rebecca knew something was wrong the moment she turned onto her street. Her apartment building looked the same as always, the historic brownstone with ivy climbing the brick facade, the warm glow of the vintage street lamps. But the window to her third-floor unit was dark when it should have been lit. She'd left the lamp on that morning. She always left the lamp on. Her hand went instinctively to her phone, Marcus's number already on speed dial. But she stopped. If she called the police, Santiago's people would be the ones who responded. If she called Marcus, she'd be dragging a retired detective into something that could get him killed. Rebecca took a breath, steadied herself, and walked into the building. The stairwell was empty. Her footsteps echoed off the marble steps. When she reached her door, she found it slightly ajar, the lock mechanism expertly picked, no signs of forced entry. Professional work, not some random burglar looking for electronics. She pushed the door open slowly. The apartment had been systematically torn apart. Not ransacked, that would have been random, chaotic. This was surgical. Every drawer opened and carefully searched, every book pulled from the shelf and examined, her desk drawers emptied, the contents spread across the hardwood floor in neat piles. They'd even removed the electrical outlet covers, checking the wall cavities. But they hadn't taken her laptop, hadn't touched her jewelry box, hadn't stolen the cash she kept in the kitchen drawer. They were looking for one thing: the files.
Rebecca moved through the wreckage of her home, her training kicking in. Check every room, clear every corner, make sure they were gone before letting her guard down. The bedroom was the same, mattress partially lifted, closet searched, even the air vents examined. Then she saw it, on her bathroom mirror, written in her own lipstick, "Last warning." Her blood went cold. They'd been in her space, touching her things, sending a message that nowhere was safe. Santiago wanted her to know that he could reach her anywhere, anytime. But as Rebecca stood there, staring at those 2 words smeared across her mirror, something shifted inside her. The fear that Santiago wanted her to feel transformed into something harder, sharper, rage. They thought they could intimidate her. They thought by violating her home, they could make her retreat. They were wrong.
Rebecca walked to her living room and knelt beside the overturned couch. She pressed her fingers along the bottom edge of the frame until she found the small metal latch. The false bottom clicked open, revealing a fireproof document box she'd installed 6 months ago. Inside, 3 backup drives containing years of evidence: bank records, offshore accounts, recorded conversations, photographs of Santiago's network meeting with known criminals, text messages proving collusion between officers, judges, and city officials. Everything she needed to burn the iron circle to the ground. The intruders had been thorough, but they'd underestimated her. They thought she'd keep the evidence somewhere obvious: a safe, a filing cabinet, a computer. They didn't understand that Rebecca Wood had learned long ago never to put all her ammunition in one place. She pulled out her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "They came for the files," she said without preamble. "Broke into my apartment. Professional job." "Are you safe? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. And they didn't find what they were looking for." A pause, then Marcus's voice, grim with understanding. "You hid them." Multiple copies, different locations. Rebecca looked around at her violated home, at the message on her mirror, at the systematic destruction meant to break her spirit. "Marcus, I need you to help me do something." "Name it." "I need to go on offense. Santiago thinks he can scare me into submission. It's time to show him what happens when you corner someone who's already decided they'd rather fight than run." Through the phone, she heard Marcus's low chuckle. "I was hoping you'd say that. Meet me at the old precinct house, the one they shut down on Garfield Avenue. 1 hour. And Rebecca, bring everything you've got. If we're going to war, we'd better bring enough ammunition to win." Rebecca hung up, took one last look at the mirror, and wiped away the lipstick message with her bare hand. She grabbed the document box, her laptop, and the go bag she'd packed months ago when she first realized how dangerous this fight would become. The Iron Circle had just made their biggest mistake. They'd shown Rebecca that they were afraid of what she knew. And fear, she'd learned, was just another word for weakness. The old precinct house on Garfield Avenue looked like a monument to forgotten promises. Shuttered 5 years ago during budget cuts that mysteriously spared precincts in wealthier districts, it stood 3 stories of crumbling brick and boarded windows. Graffiti covered the lower walls. The sign reading Metro Police Department, District 7 hung crooked, half its letters missing. Rebecca pulled into the empty parking lot just as the sun began to set. A single light glowed in a second-floor window, Marcus's signal that it was safe. She found him in what used to be the detective's bullpen. Detective Thomas Marcus was 62, built like a man who'd spent his life lifting weights to work out frustration. His gray hair was cut military short, and his eyes carried the particular weariness of someone who'd seen the system fail too many times to count. He sat at an old metal desk surrounded by boxes, evidence boxes, judging by the official seals and case numbers scrawled on their sides. "Miss Wood," he said, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused. "I've been following your case. That cross-counter you threw, textbook. Whoever trained you right." "Elena Martinez," Rebecca said, "and call me Rebecca. If we're going to take down Santiago together, we should probably be on first-name terms." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Take down Santiago. I've been trying to do that for 20 years. He's been untouchable since he made sergeant. Always knew how to play the politics, how to bury investigations, how to turn loyalty into a weapon." "What happened to you?" Rebecca asked, setting her document box on the desk. "You were decorated. 3 commendations for valor. Why did you retire early?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I didn't retire. I was forced out. 5 years ago, I was investigating a series of drug busts that didn't add up. Arrests where the evidence was too clean. Suspects who couldn't afford lawyers suddenly had expensive representation, and conviction rates that were statistically impossible." He pulled out a worn manila folder. "I traced it back to Santiago's unit. They weren't just planting evidence, they were running protection for dealers who paid the right price. The Iron Circle wasn't fighting crime, they were managing it, taking their cut and eliminating competition." "What happened when you reported it?" "My captain buried my report. Internal Affairs lost my evidence. Then I started getting followed. My wife got threatening calls. My daughter," his voice cracked slightly, "my daughter's car was run off the road. She survived, but the message was clear. Stop investigating or lose everything." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. "So you stopped?" "I took early retirement, signed an NDA, accepted a settlement that bought my silence." Marcus looked at the boxes around him. "But I didn't destroy my evidence. I kept copies of everything. Every report I filed, every witness statement, every financial record I could get my hands on. I've been sitting on the keys to the kingdom for 5 years, waiting for someone brave enough or crazy enough to use them." He opened one of the boxes and pulled out a thick binder. "This is Santiago's real career, not the commendations and the press conferences. This is the money trail. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, shell companies in Delaware, property purchases that don't match his salary, payments to judges, prosecutors, union officials." Rebecca's heart raced. "Marcus, this is—" "Everything," he finished. "This is everything we need to prove the Iron Circle isn't just a few bad cops. It's systemic. It goes all the way to the top. City council members, state senators, even a federal judge." He pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tape. "And this is the nuclear option. Santiago's personal insurance policy, a ledger documenting every bribe, every fix, every dirty deal. He kept it in case his partners ever turned on him. I got a copy from a courier who had an attack of conscience." Rebecca opened her own document box, laying out her backup drives and files alongside Marcus's evidence. Side by side, it was a complete picture of corruption spanning 2 decades. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come forward after 5 years of silence?" Marcus met her eyes. "Because I'm dying, Rebecca. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I don't have anything left to lose, and I'll be damned if I die knowing Santiago's still out there destroying lives. You hit him in that courtroom. You showed the world he can be touched. That gave me something I haven't had in 5 years. What's that?" "Hope." He gestured to the evidence surrounding them. "This is your ammunition, Rebecca. Use it. Burn him down. And when you do, make sure the whole city sees exactly what he's been hiding." Rebecca looked at the mountain of evidence, years of corruption documented, preserved, waiting for this moment.
2 people who'd been silenced by Santiago's machine, now armed with the truth. "We're going to need a plan," she said, "something that ensures this evidence gets out, even if they come for us." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Good thing I've had 5 years to think about it."
It started at 6 a.m. with a single tweet from the Police Benevolent Association's official account. Breaking. New evidence shows MP Rebecca Wood initiated confrontation. Enhanced footage reveals aggressive posture moments before Officer Jose attempted to restrain her. Full video at link. Rebecca's phone exploded with notifications. She was still at the old precinct with Marcus, both of them having worked through the night organizing evidence. When she opened the link, her blood turned to ice. The video showed the courtroom confrontation, but something was wrong. The footage had been edited, subtly, expertly. The original viral video showed Officer Jose crossing the courtroom floor unprovoked. This version was different. It started 3 seconds earlier, showing Rebecca holding up the incriminating photograph, but the timing was manipulated. Through careful cutting, it appeared as though she'd stepped toward Jose aggressively, her hand raised with the photo looking almost like a weapon. Then came the doctored part. Jose's slap was obscured by a conveniently placed pillar in this new camera angle, making it look like he was reaching out to restrain her, not strike her. Rebecca's counterpunch, however, was crystal clear, violent, unprovoked, devastating. "They deep-faked it," Marcus said, watching over her shoulder, "or used alternate angles and selective editing. This is professional disinformation." By 7 a.m., every major news network had picked up the story. Rebecca watched in horror as the narrative shifted in real time. "We're now learning that the viral video that made MP Rebecca Wood look like a victim may have been misleading," a morning anchor said, her expression grave. "This enhanced footage from a different courtroom camera tells a very different story." The doctored video played. Experts were brought in to analyze her aggressive body language. Former prosecutors debated whether she'd premeditated the attack. Social media, which had rallied behind her just days ago, began to fracture. Hashtag Stand With Rebecca was drowned by hashtag Rebecca Lied. Commenters who'd called her a hero now called her a fraud. The narrative Santiago had crafted was spreading like wildfire. Rebecca Wood was a politician who'd orchestrated a confrontation to gain publicity and victimhood status. Patricia Okonkwo called at 8:15 a.m. "We need to respond immediately. Do you have the original courtroom footage, the official recording?" "The court clerk said the official recording malfunctioned," Rebecca said, her voice hollow. "Convenient timing."
"Of course it did." Patricia's frustration was palpable. "Rebecca, this is a coordinated attack. They're not just trying to win in court, they're trying you in the media. And right now, they're winning." By noon, Santiago himself held a press conference. He stood at the podium with Officer Jose beside him, the officer's face still bruised, a neck brace adding dramatic effect that Rebecca suspected was theatrical. "For days, we've watched MP Wood play the victim," Santiago said, his voice steady and authoritative. "We've watched her supporters vilify a decorated officer who was simply doing his duty. But the truth, as this enhanced footage shows, is that she initiated this confrontation. She used her position, her training, and her political platform to assault an officer and then claim victimhood. That's not justice. That's manipulation." The reporters ate it up. Questions flew about whether Rebecca should be expelled from Parliament, whether she'd staged the incident, whether her entire corruption investigation was a political witch hunt. Rebecca watched from the old precinct, Marcus standing silent beside her. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, colleagues distancing themselves, donors pulling support, allies suddenly unavailable for comment. "They're burying me," she said quietly. "In 24 hours, they've completely flipped the narrative." Marcus's hand came to rest on her shoulder.
That's what Santiago does. He controls the story. He's got media contacts, bought journalists, PR firms on retainer. But Rebecca, there's something he doesn't have. What's that? The truth. He gestured to the boxes of evidence surrounding them, and a plan to make sure the truth gets louder than his lies. Rebecca looked at her phone one more time. The doctored video had been viewed 40 million times. Her reputation was in tatters. Santiago had won this round decisively. But as she watched the commissioner's smug face on the screen, she felt something crystallize inside her. Santiago had overplayed his hand. He'd shown the world exactly how desperate he was to destroy her, and desperate people make mistakes. "Marcus," she said, turning away from the television, "tell me about this plan of yours, because if we're going to beat Santiago, we need to do it where he can't control the narrative. We need to do it in a courtroom, under oath, where lies have consequences." Marcus smiled grimly. "That's exactly what I was thinking. It's time to stop playing defense. Tomorrow, we go on the attack. And when we do, we make sure the whole world is watching, with cameras he can't manipulate and questions he can't dodge." The media siege had been brutal, but sieges only work if the people inside eventually surrender. Rebecca Wood wasn't surrendering. She was reloading.
The High Court was packed to capacity. Every seat filled, every inch of standing room occupied. This wasn't just Rebecca Wood's hearing anymore. It had become a referendum on the entire justice system. Patricia Okonkwo had done the impossible. She'd subpoenaed Commissioner Gary Santiago himself. The motion argued that since Santiago had publicly vouched for the authenticity of the doctored video and Officer Jose's version of events, he was a material witness. The judge, under intense public scrutiny, had no choice but to grant it. Santiago sat in the witness box, his silver hair perfect, his uniform pressed and decorated. He looked every inch the career public servant, respected, dignified, untouchable. Rebecca sat at the defense table, her hands folded calmly despite her racing heart. Marcus was in the gallery, surrounded by boxes of evidence. Everything hinged on the next 30 minutes. Patricia began gently. "Commissioner Santiago, you've served this city for 32 years, is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am, it's been my honor." "And during that time, you've built what's commonly referred to as the Iron Circle, a network of officers, judges, and officials dedicated to maintaining order in this city?" Santiago's smile didn't waver. "That's a colorful term invented by critics. I simply maintain professional relationships with colleagues who share my commitment to public safety." "I see." Patricia pulled out a document. "Commissioner, do you recognize this financial disclosure form, the one you filed with the city last year?" "Of course, I file one annually as required." "And in this form, you listed your net worth as approximately $580,000. Is that accurate?" "Yes." Santiago's confidence remained solid. Patricia placed another document on the projector. Bank records filled the screen. "Then can you explain these wire transfers? $2.3 million deposited into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands over the past 5 years, accounts registered to shell companies, which, as it happens, list you as the beneficial owner." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Santiago's jaw tightened. "I'm not familiar with those accounts." "You're not familiar with Sentinel Holdings, LLC, or Guardian Trust International?" Patricia's voice sharpened. "Both companies that purchased properties in your name." "Those must be errors in the records." "Under penalty of perjury, Commissioner, are you testifying that you do not own or control these accounts?"
Santiago hesitated. The trap was closing. If he admitted ownership, he'd just confessed to financial fraud. If he denied it, Patricia had the paper trail to prove perjury. "I may have investments I'm not immediately recalling. Let me help your memory." Patricia laid out a ledger, the one Marcus had mentioned, Santiago's insurance policy. This is your personal record, Commissioner, the one you kept documenting every bribe, every payoff, every dirty deal. We have the original, seized from a courier who cooperated with investigators. Rebecca watched Santiago's face drain of color. For 30 years he'd controlled every narrative, manipulated every system. Now he was cornered in a courtroom, under oath, with nowhere to run. Commissioner, Patricia continued, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom, did you coordinate the release of doctored video footage to discredit Ms. Wood's legitimate self-defense claim? No. Did you order the break-in at Ms. Wood's apartment? Absolutely not. Did you force Detective Thomas Marcus into early retirement to cover up your corruption? I resent these accusations. Patricia turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have testimony from 3 retired officers, 2 FBI agents conducting a parallel investigation, and documentation spanning 20 years proving Commissioner Santiago has operated a criminal enterprise under color of authority. I move for immediate arrest on charges of racketeering, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy. The judge looked at Santiago, then at the mountain of evidence being wheeled in by Marcus and 2 federal agents Rebecca hadn't known were in the gallery. Commissioner Santiago, the judge said slowly, you are hereby remanded into federal custody pending investigation.
2 federal marshals approached the witness stand. Santiago stood, his perfect posture finally crumbling. As they handcuffed him, he looked directly at Rebecca. The mask of authority had shattered, revealing nothing but a frightened, desperate man who'd finally run out of places to hide. As for Miss Wood, the judge continued, all charges are dismissed with prejudice. This court finds that she acted in lawful self-defense against an officer who was, as the evidence now shows, part of a broader criminal conspiracy. The gavel fell. The courtroom exploded in chaos. Reporters rushing for doors, spectators cheering or shouting in disbelief, cameras flashing like lightning. Rebecca sat motionless for a moment, letting it sink in. She'd done it. They'd done it. The Iron Circle, Santiago's empire of corruption, was finished. Marcus appeared beside her, his hand on her shoulder. That, he said with satisfaction, is how you take down a king. Rebecca stood, straightened her emerald suit, and walked toward the exit. The media siege that had nearly destroyed her was already reversing course. By tonight, she'd be a hero again. But this time, she'd earned it, not with a punch, but with the truth. Justice, she'd learned, doesn't just speak. Sometimes it has to fight. And when it does, it fights with evidence, courage, and people brave enough to stand when everyone else sits down.
The courthouse steps were bathed in afternoon sunlight when Rebecca emerged. Below, a sea of cameras and microphones waited. Reporters jostled for position. Citizens who'd followed the case lined the barriers, some holding signs reading "Justice Prevails," others simply wanting to witness history. Above the crowd, news helicopters circled, broadcasting this moment to millions. Behind her, through the heavy courthouse doors, Commissioner Gary Santiago was being processed into federal custody. The Iron Circle, 30 years of corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power had finally been broken. Not with violence, not with politics, but with evidence, courage, and the very legal system Santiago thought he controlled. Rebecca stood at the top of the steps, Patricia Okonkwo on her left, Detective Marcus on her right. Marcus looked frailer than he had days ago, the cancer taking its toll, but his eyes burned bright with vindication. "MP Wood," a reporter shouted, "how do you feel knowing you've taken down one of the most powerful men in the city?" Rebecca stepped forward to the microphone podium that had been set up. She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. This moment would define not just her, but the precedent for everyone who came after. "I didn't take down Commissioner Santiago," she began, her voice steady and clear. "The law did. The evidence did. The courage of people like Detective Marcus, who risked everything to preserve the truth, did. I'm just the person who refused to be silenced." She looked out at the crowd, seeing faces of every age and background. "3 weeks ago, I was struck by an officer in a courtroom. My instinct was to defend myself, and I did. But that punch, that 3-second moment that went viral, was never the real fight. The real fight was always going to be in here," she gestured behind her to the courthouse, "where evidence matters, where lies have consequences, where the truth, no matter how long it takes to emerge, eventually wins." "MP Wood," another reporter called out, "do you regret hitting Officer Jose?"
Rebecca considered the question. "I regret that it came to that. I regret that we live in a world where a woman presenting evidence of corruption gets struck for it. But do I regret defending myself? No, because that moment taught me, and I hope it taught others, that standing your ground isn't just about physical courage. It's about refusing to let intimidation work. It's about saying no more when everyone expects you to say yes, sir." She paused, feeling the weight of the moment. 7 years ago, I was a young lawyer who was intimidated into silence. I learned to fight because I swore I'd never be that powerless again. But the greatest lesson I learned wasn't how to throw a punch. It was that real power doesn't come from violence. It comes from persistence, from documentation, from building cases that can't be dismissed or doctored or buried. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his presence a testament to that truth. Rebecca placed her hand on his shoulder. Detective Marcus spent 5 years in silence, watching the system he'd served betray everything he believed in. He could have destroyed his evidence out of fear or bitterness. Instead, he preserved it. He waited. And when the moment came, he stood up. That's the precedent we're setting today. Not that violence is the answer. It isn't. But that when the powerful abuse their authority, when they think their badges or their positions make them untouchable, there are people willing to stand. There are people who will document, who will preserve evidence, who will wait for their moment in a court of law, where truth still matters. A young woman in the crowd, barely 20, raised her voice. "What do you say to people who are facing their own Santiagos, their own systems that seem impossible to beat?" Rebecca smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was genuine. "I say document everything. I say find your allies. They're often people who've been silenced just like you. I say learn to fight, but remember that fighting doesn't always mean fists. Sometimes it means refusing to quit. Sometimes it means standing on courthouse steps after everyone told you to sit down." She looked directly at the cameras. "And I say this, the system isn't perfect, but it can work when we make it work, when we demand accountability, when we refuse to let corruption hide behind uniforms or titles or political power."
Behind her, through the courthouse windows, she could see Santiago being escorted through the halls in handcuffs. The man who'd thought himself untouchable. The man who'd built an empire on fear and silence. Now just another criminal facing justice. Rebecca turned back to the crowd. "My fists started this fight, but the law finished it, and that's how it should be." As she stepped away from the podium, the crowd erupted, not in the divisive chaos of 3 weeks ago, but in something different: unity, hope.
the understanding that justice, though slow and imperfect, was still possible. Marcus leaned close as they walked down the steps. "You know they're going to want you to run for higher office now. Mayor, senator, maybe more." Rebecca laughed softly. "One battle at a time, Marcus. First, I need to make sure the reforms stick, that Santiago's network is completely dismantled, that the people he hurt get justice. And then?" She looked back at the courthouse, at the building that represented both the system's failures and its potential. "Then we find the next fight, because there's always another Santiago, another system that needs fixing, another person who needs someone to stand with them." Rebecca Wood had walked into a courtroom 3 weeks ago as a politician trying to expose corruption. She'd been struck, she struck back, and she'd been vilified and vindicated in equal measure. But as she walked down those courthouse steps into the afternoon sun, she walked as something more, a leader who'd proven that the law, when wielded with courage and truth, was more powerful than any punch. The slap heard around the world had become the case that changed everything. And the judge, he'd finally seen exactly what was coming. Justice. Before you go away, you just spent the last minutes watching Rebecca Wood fight a system that tried to break her. You saw her stand up when everyone told her to sit down. You watched her refuse to be silenced, intimidated, or bought off. And now I need to ask you something important. Are you going to scroll past this story like it never happened? Because here's the truth. Stories like Rebecca's only matter if people actually talk about them, if people share them, if people refuse to let them disappear into the algorithm. Right now, someone in your life needs to hear this story. Maybe it's a friend who's been intimidated by their boss. Maybe it's a family member who thinks the system can't be beaten. Maybe it's a young person who needs to see what courage actually looks like. But they'll never see it if you don't share it. Look, I get it. You're busy. You've got a million other videos to watch. But think about this. Rebecca didn't quit when it got hard. Marcus didn't destroy his evidence when it got dangerous. They fought for years because they believed the truth mattered. All I'm asking is that you take 5 seconds to hit the like button, maybe 10 more to leave a comment about what you thought. And if this story actually moved you, if it made you think about justice differently, then share it. Send it to one person who needs to see it. That's it. That's all it takes to make sure stories like this don't get buried. Because here's what happens if you don't. This video gets lost in the algorithm. The next person who needs to hear about Rebecca Wood, who needs to know that standing up to corruption is possible, they'll never find it. And all the time you just spent watching this story, it ends here, with you going nowhere. But if you do engage, if you like, comment, and share, then this story reaches the people who need it most. It reaches the next Rebecca Wood, the next Marcus, the next person who's deciding right now whether to fight back or stay silent.
You have that power, right now, with one click. So before you scroll to the next video, ask yourself, did this story matter to me? Did Rebecca's courage inspire me? Did watching Santiago finally face consequences make me believe, even for a second, that justice is still possible? If the answer is yes, then prove it. Hit that like button right now. Leave a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. And share this with at least one person who needs to see that standing up to corrupt systems isn't just possible, it's necessary. Rebecca didn't back down. Don't let her story disappear because you were too busy to click a button. And if you want more stories about real people fighting real corruption, about underdogs who refuse to quit, about justice that actually gets served, then subscribe, because I'm not stopping.
There are more Rebeccas out there, more Marcuses, more stories that need to be told, but I can only keep telling them if you show me they matter. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just watch, don't just consume, participate, engage, share. Be the reason this story reaches someone who desperately needs to see it. Rebecca fought for years to take down the Iron Circle. The least you can do is spend 5 seconds making sure her story spreads. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Do it now, before you forget, before the algorithm buries this, before the next person who needs this story never gets to see it. Justice doesn't just happen, and stories don't spread themselves. It's on you now. What are you going to do?